Hello, everybody. We'll get started in just a second. Okay, so I hope everybody got my email about our pretest and my inability to understand Google. I'm working on it, so if you have a chance, um, please go retake the pretest. And again, I apologize for your wasted time associated with that. Now, just a second. I want to make sure that everybody's getting on okay. And we will get started in just 1 minute. All right, everybody. I think I have given everybody the ability to unmute if you want to ask a question or have a comment. So please feel free to do that. I really like to have, the teaching environment. So we will get started today. So welcome to session 2 of Compass. Today we're going to talk about the MTSS, or multi-tiered system of support, along with evaluations and eligibility. So there may be some slides in the document that we don't talk about just for time purposes, but you do have access to that on the Google Drive, which if you check out the chat box, it is in the link to today's session handout is there. So let me share it one more time. And again, my apologies that everybody has to take the pretest again because I'm still learning how to use Google, and I very much apologize for that. So I sent everybody an email today and asked you to please retake the test. I'm glad someone brought it to my attention that the entire test wasn't there, so it was very helpful. So if anybody doesn't have any questions about session 1, we will get started. So did anybody have any trouble locating your handouts and documents for either last session or today? I did have a survey question that said that the handouts were not available, so I want to make sure everybody understands how to locate those handouts. Alrighty, let's get started. So what did everybody think of Erin's presentation? Feel free to unmute yourself and let me know what you thought. Anybody? I'm guessing everybody can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you okay.
Okay. Anybody want to comment on what they thought about Erin's presentation? So Erin works with an agency called Angels for Hire, in which they place individuals with intellectual disabilities within stadiums for different job purposes. So they really promote inclusion. So and I liked Erin's presentation about the history of disabilities within our country. So I was very impressed with her presentation. I hope everybody else was too. Okay. So again, we're just going to go over a lot of this, I don't want to say in a quick fashion, but I don't like to set and yell out legislative law and things at you. I feel like that's not super helpful. Um, the chat is disabled. How do I fix the chat? Oh my goodness. I'm struggling, guys. I don't know how to fix the chat. Dear. I don't know. Don't know how to fix that one. But thank you for bringing that to my attention. Okay. All right, let's get at it. So, we're going to start off with IDEA. Not that the history of anything special education wise isn't important, but for what you're learning for and for what your purpose will be with our parents and our families that call, let's just get started at 2004 with IDEA when schools like kind of reauthorized some things when it came to eligibility and evaluations, and they really started to discover that IQ testing isn't everything. So a good example for this would be maybe a student on the spectrum is going to test off the charts as far as IQ goes, but socially and communication skills are very much lacking and impairing his education. So we before that they really relied a lot on IQ testing, and everybody has their own opinion on IQ testing, but they didn't, it's not solely relied on anymore to identify students that need support within the school. Instead, schools can use research-based practices such as RTI or response to intervention to determine if a student may have any learning difficulties or a disability. So later on, a presentation from our former executive director, Deb Einhorn, will be given to you on research-based interventions. So they're great. Um, and we'll talk about those at a later session. So, scientific research based interventions again include methods of relying on a child's response to scientific research based interventions. Um, RTI, of course, is very much research based, and we're going to talk about the level in which students are identified, and then we're going to come back and talk about RTI and what RTI may look like for students. So these are some more regulations. You can read through these. Um, so basically, there's a good illustration coming up of a pyramid of support, kind of like what the food guide pyramid used to look like. At the bottom of that pyramid is where all students receive instruction was when they first start school. They're receiving it in the general education environment. The school is, collecting data based on spelling test, math test, reading test, and they're gathering to see what students are struggling in these areas. Um, and when they start to see that these students are struggling within these areas, they're moved to the next tier up, which they start to provide some more intervention, not directly RTI or research based, but just more intervention to the student. So they may walk by the student once every class period to see if they're understanding. They might give them a little bit extra credit if they need some things, but they're really starting to identify that the student is struggling, and that's just through regular testing that's done within the school, not the statewide assessment testing. That's different. This is just regular classroom testing, like a spelling test or math test. And then we're going to start to see that these students need a little bit more support, and they're moved up to that second tier when they're really watched for the use of support. And at that time, if the student is still struggling, they're still struggling even with a little extra attention from the teacher, we're going to start to implement things called RTI. So RTI is also referred to as a push in or pull out service. It may be a little bit extra math help or reading help or social skills help. It's services that are provided on top of what they're already getting within the classroom. Okay, so they're not missing instruction time to get this service. When I substitute taught, a lot of times I would see like I was allotted 45 minutes for math. Of that 45 minutes that I taught, half an hour would be instruction and 15 minutes of that would be free work for students to, independently work. And during that 15-minute independently work time, I might have 3 or 4 students at my table that I re-went over the skills that they were getting. So we're not changing anything about what they're learning. That's the big thing there. We're just providing these research-based interventions to see if they start to improve with that little bit extra support. At the end of the day, some students may actually leave the classroom and get a little bit more pull-out service and gets a little bit more reading and writing or math support or social skill support. But again, we're not changing what they're learning. We're just reintroducing the instruction to them. So that's kind of what RTI is. It's a way that the school, we talked about this a little bit last week, does child find and start to see what students may need support. But the big cue here is when those RTI interventions start, the parents should start to get documentation of that. We're going to measure the students' growth in response to the interventions that we're giving them. Are their grades improving? Are their social skills improving? Is their focus improving with giving these research-based intervention with these interventions? So parents will start to get those benchmarks and scores sent to them along with report cards, or sometimes even sooner than that. A lot of parents that call here are not aware that their students are receiving RTI, not because the school hasn't informed them, but it came along with the report card or it came along with another letter from the school and they aren't quite for sure what it was, and it's hard to read. I don't know if anybody has seen RTI results that are sent home, but I get them every 6 weeks. I am trained to understand what they mean, and they're still really hard. It's usually a graphed form. The school doesn't print it in color, so it's black and white, so things are messy and it's hard to read. So a lot of parents don't even know that their student is receiving RTI at that time when they first, call our office.
Hi, Abby. This is Jamie.
Hey, Jamie.
I did want to chime in on that because I would help the family and their child was in the an RTI, and I would receive copies of the reports with the graphs and the numbers at the bottom. And at first, I just couldn't grasp understand. It's still, a little shaky on it, but you do get to see some of the progress because some of the numbers might show, some are up or down.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's very difficult, just like you said.
It is. It's very difficult to understand what those are. My senior in high school receives RTI intervention, and I get stuff home from it. So I've been getting RTI from him for a long time, and it's still really hard to understand. And it's okay as a parent, and you're going to work with parents where they may hopefully when they get this letter saying your student qualifies as receiving RTI, they'll call our office and we can explain the process. So that might be something that you are involved with, helping them to understand what those RTI reports look like. But it's okay to ask somebody at the school to explain that to you further. I know you're not having an official IEP meeting, but it is absolutely okay to call whoever is monitoring your RTI, which should be listed on that report. Mrs. Smith is giving extra math support. It's okay to call her and say, okay, tell me what type of intervention you're doing. And she might say, I'm reading this to him out loud and watching him do the work, having him show his work, and she'll explain to you the interventions that she's giving to him. And then you can say, okay, explain to me, is he making progress with these interventions? Because I don't see it in the grades. It's a lot of times with RTI, the grades aren't coming up very quickly when we first get started. So as a parent, that's the only way we know to watch, whether it's an ABC or a 1, 2, 3 grading scale, is my student doing better? With those RTIs, with the graphs and when I say graph, it's like a bar graph. It's hard to I don't like RTI reports at all, but they come, and we're supposed to, as a parent, understand supposed to understand first all this really long description of what really just is. I'm reading it out loud to him and helping him put things in the right places on a worksheet. But it doesn't say that on the paper. It gives this huge long explanation of what the intervention is, and then it gives you a percentage if he's doing well. And it's really hard to understand. So we try to let parents know, and I really think it would be a good topic for us to explain RTI further in like a small podcast to parents, and have them understand that if your student is receiving RTI, for one, you're going to get a notification from the school because you have that right to know what's going on, and two, call here and we'll review those RTI reports with you to see if your student is making sufficient progress. Because if not, guess what? Now we know that they're getting all this RTI and they're still struggling. So if it doesn't work, what's our steps to come? I think I just went over like 8 slides, guys. I'm so sorry. I just get on a roll. Thank you, Jamie, for helping with that too. Um, okay. I went over that one. Yes, RTI is school-wide, meaning there may be other students receiving the same type of intervention as your student, so it's not individualized like a special education plan. It's an ongoing progressive monitoring. Students would have to really show that they no longer need that RTI support so it's something that's going to be picked up first thing next year if your student didn't make enough progress the year before and continue, and it's three-tiered. So here's a great illustration here. So your bottom one, I like the one in my ESP training better. Jamie, I think you could probably say it too, the layout's a little bit better. But we're getting regular science work and spelling work here. If a student is struggling with the regular classwork and showing that on assessments, they're going to move up here to the second tier where a teacher starts to monitor that. And then if then they're still struggling, they're going to move up to start receiving that RTI support. So here's a good example. So in Tier 1, along with the rest of the third grade class, John receives high quality reading instruction. John consistently scores below his peers and scores low on the high stakes test. Now remember, last week we talked about ESSA and how we put those, things into place, how we put goals as Illinois into place. So if John's in third grade, we know from those ESSA reports from last year that all third grade students should be reading at a third grade level. John's not, he's reading below. So John's going to move to the second tier where he receives small group instruction in addition to the whole group's class. John's teacher takes data on John's progress, but John is still not making progress. So then he's going to move to 3 where he receives, support, supplementally instruction, okay? So here's kind of a timeline here. We started school in August. By month 1, he had moved to second tier already. 6 weeks, he had moved to that tier 3. And by 8 weeks, he was referred for an evaluation for an IEP. So this is kind of how an RTI timeline needs to work here. So I always get a lot of questions. What is my time frame here? How long should a student be on RTI without support before we move? You can see that it needs to move fairly quickly. We need to start those interventions. If they're not working, maybe try some more, but we should not be spending too much time because IDEA is very clear that evaluations cannot be postponed while we wait on RTI intervention. Okay, so if there's a problem right out the bat, this has already kind of taken place. So we can't, a parent can't come to the table and say, my kid's failing everything. I want him evaluated for special education. And the teacher says, well, let's start some RTI. We should have already been doing that RTI at that point. If he's failing everything and has been consistently failing everything for a hot minute, RTI should have been happening, right? So just put that there. Advocating for RTI, keep documenting stuff of like monitoring through the tiers. You can ask for progress reports if you're not getting them. We have had parents that start working with us and we've requested those RTI benchmarks to be sent so we can evaluate those. The school should be keeping a log of those. Document the collaboration between how long has the parent been working with the school to see what's going on. Not like make sure we're monitoring the tiers and where they're moving at. You can request that evaluation at any point and keep in mind that disciplinary provisions can still take effect in tier 2 and 3. So our students at this time, and we're going to talk about this at a very later session. I feel like I say that way too much, but these students don't have any protection from disciplinary just because they're getting tier 2 supports, okay? We'll talk about it a little later on about the protection students have that have an IEP from not from discipline, but from certain types of discipline. So they still can get in trouble for their actions and be held accountable, but it looks different. So questions to ask when you're working with a family: what tier may be appropriate for the student and what's the length of each tier? So you can get that documented. How long can they stay in tier 1 or 2 before we know that we need to be moved? What does the instruction look like? How will the data be collected? When will it be sent to me, and how often is this data collected, and at what point will the school make a referral for an evaluation? So you can ask that at this, I don't want to call it an informal meeting because we're definitely documenting it, but it's not an IEP meeting, okay? We're just meeting to talk about your student may need RTI support. And we can say, how long are we going to do this before we do a referral? Like, how long does he need to not make progress? So line those details out at that first meeting and make sure they're documented. Any questions about that? This doesn't, we don't get a lot of phone calls for this where we would reach out for a Compass volunteer. Most of the time, parents have moved past this point or didn't know they were in the point of getting RTI when they call our office. But there has been occasions, like Jamie said, I think he's helped families with that before. Like they'll call and they'll say, "My kid's been struggling with this, this, and this," and I'll be like, "Well, are they getting RTI?" And they say, "No, we failed for 2 years and we never got RTI." So there may be occasions when you start to work with a family here, but again, we can't put RTI in place to postpone an evaluation. If there's been a huge problem consistently for a while, RTI should have done happened. We need to talk about what other possibilities may be there. So RTI is usually focused on academics, but PBIS focuses on behavior. Academic struggles or behavior, we're really going to see which is coming first. Did the academic struggles happen first or the behavior? We cannot address behavior without addressing the academics. We got to see that the behavior is impacting how the student is not learning at the same time. And we're going to look at the school climate, bullying, parent engagement, what could be causing these behaviors. Students can get support through RTI for social issues and behavior if needed. Okay, we're going to put extra supports in place. So, an example of that, like a school wide, if you turn your homework in for a month, you get an extra recess at the end of the month. Or if you don't get a detention all semester, you get to go to a school dance. So, those are like school based assessments on behavior and how a student functions at school. If we start to see that a student is starting to struggle, we're going to start putting some response to intervention in there. Like the student may check in or check out with the teacher. We may be making sure they have like a sticker chart, something very informal. This doesn't happen a lot with older students, but we do see this younger wise when they're still trying to fill out the school environment. But we're still keeping track of what's going on here to make sure that these behaviors aren't impacting their education in some way. So RTI focuses on providing a high quality instruction and intervention to struggling students. RTI falls under the umbrella of MTSS, which involves the whole school system in the intervention process. It is a multi-tiered and it provides support to all students. So it's not individualized. This is what we're doing for all students in case they need the extra support. So MTSS addresses student academic performance, social, emotional, and behavioral development, the collaboration between general and special education. So we will talk about this in just a minute. You can still receive RTI support and have an IEP. Okay, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. And it has more emphasis on prevention than intervention. Okay, so we're going to stop the problem from happening more than, yeah. Again, this curriculum is designed a little differently than how I like to teach. So some stuff I'm going to skip through just because I don't want to set and read slides to you because that's not what you want to spend your time doing, right? Read things yourself. Okay, important things to remember about RTI and MTSS. Then we're going to talk about progress monitoring. Okay, we're going to see that there's a problem. We're going to try to figure out why it's occurring. We're going to see what we could be doing about it. And when we do those things, are those things working? RTI is not special education. All right. RTI is different. Tier 3 could be special education, but it might not be as well. It just is a little bit more. RTI is for all students, including special education students like we talk about. All right, we are ready to start talking about eligibility and evaluations. So I did MTSS and RTI very quickly, and it's not because it's not important for you not to know. It's just there's a lot of stuff in there you can go back and read on your own. There's a video, I think, in the Google. There was last year. Let me check on that before I say that. There's stuff on our website that where you can watch more about it if you have more questions. Again, this course is not designed for you to have everything memorized by the end of the course. You're going to have reference to all of these things forever, but it's important to remember that the schools, like IDA has developed the MTSS system to identify students who may need support. And they start there at the level one, they move up to three, or to two, and then possibly to three if they still need the intervention. RTI are different things that we do for all students if they need the support, and it's an added on service. Okay, so that's pretty much just a very simple rundown. Any questions about that at all?
Hi, excuse me. Hi, Abby. I did
Hi.
want to mention that the parents at any time can request evaluation, even at whatever level they are in the
Absolutely.
RTI or MTSS. So they don't have to wait for the child to fail or the school
Mm-mm.
to be ready to evaluate.
Nope.
My experience is that the schools will keep trying RTI, even to a tier one, two, and three. And when you can see that the child is still struggling and might
Mm-hmm.
need an evaluation.
Yep. So, and especially we're going to talk about, I think we're going to talk about the different areas of eligibility. And it's important to remember if your student would qualify for, or you suspect your student of having a specific learning disability. Um, any RTI intervention you give that student is not going to solve the problem. They're still going to have that specific learning disability. A specific learning disability, like we talked about I think it was last week. I just did an ESP training this week, so everything's meshing together. I apologize. Um, it's about how your brain learns differently than somebody else. It does not retain information or it does not absorb information the way somebody else's brain does. So, um, giving those research-based interventions to this student is not going to be helpful for that student. So waiting for RTI to come and see if it fixes the problem is not going to be helpful for that student. Okay, it's not going to work. And really, that you could really stress that point across the board. My student's always going to have autism, even if we do RTI. Um, but there's it, and remember, we're getting ready to talk about an evaluation for an IEP, so it's going to look a little different than when we talked about the 504 plans last time. But that RTI, like Jamie said, if you and in your gut as if the parent in their gut is saying, we've tried intervention for a little while, I don't want to lose any more time, then we can request that evaluation. Okay, the school might sit down and talk to you and say, let's try a little bit more RTI. That's the parent's decision at that point, or they can still push to have the evaluation done. Any questions about that? Okay, so we're going to talk about initial and reevaluations, parent consent, procedures for the evaluation, eligibility, and independent evaluations. Okay, so this one's going to talk a little bit more. This, I think Jamie can attest to this, is where a lot of our advocates come into, or I'm sorry, our Compass volunteers come into play. So I would say 98% of the parents that call, the first thing they say is, I need an advocate. I need an advocate because of this. I need an advocate because of this. And it's not my job to tell them that they do not need an advocate by any means, but it is my job to help them advocate for themselves and learn how the system works and learn what's going on with their child's plan and share the data and share the resources with them to see if then they feel comfortable to try a meeting by themselves. Carrie and I are just cannot attend meetings that often. We cover 94 states. We went from having 136 VAP volunteers down to 12 this year because we just did some things differently and asked, made sure people were still interested in the program. Now, of those 12 volunteers, those are the same volunteers that have consistently worked with families for the last, 3 years since I've been here. Um, so that's nothing new. It's just we went from a list of 136 down to 12. Of the 12 that we're working with, they're very qualified people. I love every one of my advocates. I try not to have favorites, but Jamie's Jamie. He's pretty cool. So, so a lot of the times when a family calls us, if they're at this stage, we may help them write a letter to request the evaluation. We may talk to them about their concerns and how to put that in writing, but there are times when you might come into this as well. So students are eligible for special education and related services under IDEA only if it's determined they are a child with a disability. So having one of the 13 disabilities outlined in IDEA is something that the student has to have in order to get the support of an IEP. Now, that doesn't mean you have to have a doctor's diagnosis to get an IEP. It doesn't mean that you have to have a history of dyslexia to get an IEP, like a family history, a genetic history of dyslexia to get an IEP. It means that you have through this system of MTSS, or because you the parent yourself, has seen that your child is struggling across the board and requested this evaluation, the school is then going to research what disability may be impacting your child's education. So they're not diagnosing your child. If anything, they're giving you an educational, I hate the word diagnosis for this, but that's what they're doing. So they're not diagnosing your student, they are evaluating them and evaluating how this thing may be impacting their education. If you have something from an outside specialist or doctor and bring that information to the table, that's helpful for the school. But that does not mean that the school has to say that your child needs an IEP to overcome barriers related to the disability that the doctor has on the paper. Um, that's more of a 504 thing, that we're going to put accommodations in place because your student has this disability that the doctor says that they have. An IEP means that the school has evaluated your student and seen that they are struggling in these areas, and they think they may be struggling in these areas because of this disability. Right? So if that would happen and your student's evaluated and they come back and they say, I think that your student may have autism, that's when you can go to the doctor and get a doctor's diagnosis of autism. Okay, that the school is still saying that I believe your student may qualify for an IEP. We're seeing an impact on their education related to autism tendencies. I see that written on IEP sometimes. And this is kind of like a little back and forth. We hear from schools a lot. I shouldn't say a lot, but I've heard it a couple times. A school psychologist will say that I'm not diagnosing your student. I can't diagnose your student. I'm just telling you what I see and what I feel is impacting their education. So after you've sat down with a school and asked for an evaluation, a school can conduct a full and individualized evaluation for before the special education services can be provided. And a parent can absolutely request the evaluation. Someone from the school can request the evaluation, so anyone that's working with your student. Other state agencies can write a letter and request an evaluation, and your doctor can write a letter and request that evaluation. You notice that I put letter in each one of those. It is very important that this request be made in writing. Jamie, how many how many evaluation requests do you think you've written over the time you've been an advocate?
I'd
Like,
say about 5 or 6.
yeah, I've lost count how many that I've helped write. So, there's really good templates in the parent guide, the ISB parent guide, and we help parents write those a lot. So, it happens quite a bit. You write a letter to the school and ask for a meeting to sit down to discuss why your student may need an evaluation. And again, you're going to come to the table with information, that says my doctor says my student has this disability, or I've seen that he's consistently showing struggles in reading, and I had a conversation with the teacher and she saw the same thing. So you're bringing information to the table. So you're writing a letter asking to sit down and have a meeting to discuss why your student needs evaluations. Now, at that meeting, if it's decided upon above the special education team, not quite your son's or daughter's or students' personalized IEP team yet, but the school team that your student needs an evaluation, the parent has to sign consent for that. Okay, so consent has to be given for the evaluation to start. And those evaluations take up to 60 school days. All right. There are some cases, if it is determined a student needs an evaluation before school gets out for the summer, that those will take place over the summer, but most generally it's 60 school days that those evaluations are happening. I've seen them take less. I've seen them take right up to the 60-day mark. It just depends on the students because this is all individualized at this point. So you send a letter to the school asking to sit down and have a meeting to discuss why your student may need an evaluation. The school has 14 days to get back to you within that timeline to sit down and have a meeting. Now, I'm not saying you have to have a meeting within 14 days, but somebody from the school should be getting back to you in writing or a phone call and saying, okay, let's sit down and have a meeting. You have the meeting, you sit down, the school agrees, yes, we might see a problem here too. Let's evaluate further. All right. Now, your school can absolutely say, we do not share the same concerns and we don't see that we need an evaluation. You as the Compass volunteer or as the parent can push back. They can push back and say, but we do see this. We see this, this, and this. It's a conversation to keep having. You can come back to this meeting a couple different times. But the important thing is, and when you all leave that meeting, that you feel like you're coming to that meeting for a certain reason. You have concerns. Then make sure those concerns are addressed. If the school feels like then they can offer more RTI support, without doing the evaluation and you don't feel in your gut that the parent doesn't feel in their gut that that's the right thing to do, then they can push back. Okay. So this is a conversation meeting that we're having here. But the important thing to remember is this, the parent does have to give consent in writing, and that can take up to 60 school days. Now, a reevaluation is going to happen every 3 years. So every 3 years for a student that already has an IEP, the team will sit down and discuss what areas in which the student needs to be reevaluated. So we're going to have basically another domain meeting and talk about right now, Susie gets these supports in these areas. Do you feel like we need to evaluate any other areas? Do you feel like we need to reevaluate the areas that Susie already has? A parent can absolutely say they don't want another reevaluation. They feel like that where Susie's support is good, and we need to keep going in this area. And at that point, the school will then review the records. They'll review the last 3 years records to make sure they've made sufficient progress within those 3 years. So they don't reevaluate. And they're not looking like to see if Susie still has autism. That's not thing. Again, they're not diagnosing your student. They're re-looking to see if that disability is impacting their education. We do see too where a student already has an IEP but starts to show a regression in another area or starts to show struggles in another area. So maybe they're getting academic support but then start to struggle with behaviors, or maybe they were getting a speech only IEP and start to show problems with their academics. So then we'll go in for and talk about evaluating in another area. So. And a teacher can also do that. They can also say, I know that Susie already has a speech only IEP. Speech only IEPs, by the way, are where a student just receives speech services through the school. So they're not saying that there's a possibility their speech difficulties will impact their education through learning to read and things like that. So we're going to meet these head on before it starts a problem anywhere else. So maybe Susie has a speech only IEP and the teacher's starting to see that her academics are sliding. She can request a reevaluation at that time too. So she'll send a letter to she'll probably have a conversation with the special education coordinator, and a letter will go to the parent to have a meeting to discuss that. So I just answered that question. When is most common for reevaluation to be conducted? Every 3 years, it has to happen unless you sit down and say you don't feel like it's necessary, or if there seems to be another problem. They can reevaluations may not occur more than once a year unless the parent and public agency agrees otherwise. And the case being is because your data is not going to change much over that year. You're representing already done evaluations to a student. So we're talking about the same evaluations can't be done again, because then the student already expects what's going to happen, and the evaluation results are unclear. And again, if the parent feels like it's unnecessary to do another evaluation, they don't have to. I have done this personally for my own student before, but just one time. So it's really the parent. Do you feel like the supports they're getting are okay? I mean, my son still had autism. That wasn't going away. We were doing things to accommodate and modify for his autism. So I didn't feel like it was necessary to do a reevaluation at that time. And informed consent must be obtained before conducting the evaluations, like we talked about. To constitute the informed consent, prior written notice regarding the proposal for the evaluation must be provided. Consent for the initial evaluation is not consent for initial provision of special education and related services. So after, like, you're going to sign something again after the evaluations are completed. Schools must make responsible efforts to obtain informed consent from parents for any initial evaluations. They have to they have to get a hold of you to do this. Um, and we do see this sometimes. I will have a parent call and say, I didn't even know my kid had an IEP. Well, they didn't quite understand what they were signing when they signed it. So that does happen. That's why we're here. I'm a big like pusher. I guess like if you noticed, IEPs now have a form attached to them where your IEP team needs to explain to you what ABLE is, what an ABLE account is, and what PUNS is. I think that's great. I also think they should hand a parent a brochure for their local parent training and information center. So if my student is identified as needing support, or maybe even at that domain meeting, that first meeting that we have to talk about needing an evaluation, I think the parent should be made aware of what a parent training and information center is and how we can help the parent understand the process. I think that would be great. I don't know how much traffic that would create for us, like an influx of people calling, but I didn't know what a parent training and information center was until David was probably in fourth or fifth grade. And that's sad because I work for one now, and David's 20. So it's um, it's crazy. Like I feel like we should know more about what a parent training and information center is and what they do. So, what is parental consent? The parent has been fully informed of all information relevant to the activity for which consent is sought in his or her native language or other mode of communication. So, the school is supposed to sit down and explain every single thing they're going to do to you and why they're do for your student and why they're going to do it. That needs to be done in terms that a parent understands. It needs to be done in terms that a Compass volunteer understands. It is okay if you don't understand what the school is saying when they're using gigantic words that you don't know what the meaning of them are. It's okay to ask, especially if they're going to use acronyms or abbreviations like OHI or LRE and you don't know what those means. Ask those questions. Or maybe you know what that means, but there's a good chance the parent doesn't. You can explain what those terms are. The parent understands and agrees in writing to carry out the activity for which the consent is sought. So the parent is going to agree in writing. They're going to say, yes, I agree and sign this paper that it's okay to evaluate my student or it's okay to change my student's placement. Like this is what prior written notice is. They're getting something in there and they have to sign for it. And the granting of the consent is voluntary and it can be revoked at any time. So if a parent can revoke consent for special education services at any time. So prior written notice must be provided to parents of a child with a disability in a reasonable time before the school either progresses or refuses to initiate a change. Um, or do an evaluation or a placement of the child. So it's a provision of FAPE. So the parent must be notified in writing if a change of placement is going to happen, if we're going to add a service, take a service away, if we're going to do an evaluation. The parent has to be known, has to be sent a letter, a prior written notice to say this is what's going to happen. So the next question is, like, how long is that? Like, does anybody know what a reasonable time frame is? What it says that it should be? We are all very quiet today. Everybody has the ability to unmute. So the answer is 10 days. The parent, t- sorry, was somebody going to talk? Did I interrupt somebody?
Well, I was going to say I didn't really know the answer to that for
Okay.
sure. I know that they're supposed to give you like that you're supposed to have a copy of like your draft stuff three
Yes,
days prior.
correct.
But so I was like, I don't know if it's 3 days or 10 days.
Yeah, yeah, it's 10 days. So That draft, of course, comes to you to let you know what your progress is, any proposed new goals that's going to happen, but you should have the prior written notice of any like change of placement, removal of services, or new evaluations 10 days before they are going to happen. That's why
So,
at the, yep, go ahead.
sorry, I have a question about that. So,
Sure.
say for instance that the students like having a reevaluation,
Mm-hmm.
like their 3 year
Yes.
reevaluation or
Uh-huh.
whatever. And so the school, like, I don't know, I guess technically because they're not really supposed to make that determination prior to the meeting anyway. So I guess it's kind of a mute point. But what I was wondering was like, if they feel like a change in placement would be appropriate, then would they need to send that data 10 days prior?
Yeah,
Or,
absolutely. So if they're like they're composing your draft basically and they see that maybe a change of placement might need to happen for whatever reason, then they should send that along with your notice of conference 10 days before your meeting. So it should,
okay.
it should say on there like, proposed placement change. I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but you should get that before. Um, your 3-day draft, of course, comes to help you prepare, but in that in that conference summary, like, or not conference summary, but the notice of conference report, it might list on there it's time for your 3-year reeval, or it might list on there we want to talk about extra services. So those should be listed on that conference, but then that draft is just another great way that you see exactly what they're wanting to do.
Thank you.
I really like that we have the 3-day draft now, but at the same time, I wish we got it all the 10 days before. I think it would be more helpful for everybody if we did. But, sometimes they don't have, like, my school's really great about sending me something almost a month before, like, a month before saying, hey, October is David's IEP meeting. What time are you available in October? Most schools do that if it's like a annual review. But if it's something like I've called for a meeting, we've sat down to sit, or they've called me and said, yes, let's have one within so many days. That's why that 10-day notice sometimes can be written. Like if you were calling an emergency IEP meeting and they say, okay, we can get you on Friday, but you have to you have to waive your 10-day notice saying that we want to have a meeting. So you can waive that. So this is a great example of like a template for asking for prior written notice. So, for example, maybe this parent wanted to do something like add an extra service or wanted a teacher to give an accommodation, and um, so anyway, this is just a great example of prior written notice, asking the school for prior written notice. There's also a template in your parents guide. I just like the sippers better.
Hi, Abby. This is Jamie.
Hey.
I did want to say I haven't seen probably with the families I've helped. I haven't seen any prior written notices. I have
Okay.
helped a parent draft up a letter requesting prior written notice, but pretty much here in Illinois, you don't see much of that at all.
You don't see it the way I
Somebody
think
else.
yeah, you don't see it the way I think it should be laid out and spelled for. But again, I don't know how to fix the problem, I guess. So I mean, I could give suggestions. Like I think it would be great if, the school sends me a letter saying we're going to have an IEP meeting in 10 days. I think I should have got more notice than the 10 days. But let's say, we're going to have an IEP meeting in 10 days because Brian's starting to slip and fall or whatever. And we think maybe we should change his placement. Like, I think that would be great if that was spelled out in terms like that on that prior written notice that came with my notice of conference. But sometimes it doesn't look quite that way. And then if you don't really understand how to review that draft, you really miss it. And that's not to say that you can't, like, all is lost. That's what the meeting is for. You go in there and talk about reasons why this should or shouldn't happen. But the whole idea of prior written notice and the whole idea of those drafts is that parents don't walk into meetings and be blindsided anymore with a change of placement or removal of service or a certain disciplinary action that may need to take place. It's so that they have like a way to prepare before they walk into the meeting to build their own case. But I don't think you see it like you should. I agree. Okay. So if a child is a ward of the state and is not residing with the child's parents, the public agency is not required to obtain informed consent prior to the initial evaluation. So I do all the educational surrogate parent training for the state unless it's done in the Chicago area. And then we have an outsourced trainer that does that. So basically, this gets a little complicated, but if we have a student that has been moved into the care of DCFS and maybe living in a residential facility, not a foster home, it's a little different with their placed immediately in foster care, and the school starts to see that there's a big problem, like the student's struggling, the school can start that evaluation, and then an educational surrogate parent is assigned to the student. So it's a little different when these things happen. This is not something that you as a Compass volunteer would be involved in unless you would like me to get my hooks into you to be an ESP, because being an ESP is wonderful, right, Jamie? I love it. So this is not something that you would have to worry about being involved in, but this is something that happens. So students may be within the public school district that live in a residential facility or a group home in the area, and they attend the public school and they start to have problems. Because there's such a big, like, who can sign consent? Is it a case manager for DCFS? Anyway, we can start to get them help very quickly, and then an ESP will be assigned to that student. So at that point, a parent's rights have been removed from the situation, so they're not involved in that part of the process for whatever reason. And it can be for a variety of reasons. Sometimes we have students living in Illinois that are unaccompanied homeless youth, and they may be living in a homeless shelter. Okay, so then Illinois will make a very good attempt of trying to find their parents, but in the meantime, the parents' rights can't be terminated, but the student still needs support. So at that point, there'll be, an ESP would be assigned to that student. Sometimes that happens too if a student is in a juvenile justice facility. Most of the time there, they will not be receiving educational support in a school setting, but a local district may be providing education in a county jail or something like that. So again, and these isn't something that you as a Compass volunteer will work a lot with unless you decide to become an ESP, which the ESP training doesn't take the 10 weeks. It's a little different. So if you're interested in becoming an ESP, there is a link here, or you can absolutely just send me an email and I send you more information about it. If the parent does not want to provide consent or fails to respond to a request for consent, the school may file due process. So if the school feels like there is a huge problem and the parent does not want to provide consent, they can go to due process. And you learn a little bit about due process later on. We're going to have a really great presenter from Equip for Equality explain conflict resolution, but I have seen this several times where mostly if we have two parents that are trying to co-parent together and one really feels like a student needs support and the other one does not, this is where the school can file due process and go and say the student needs support, but we can't get the parents to agree that the student needs to be evaluated. So this can happen. Most generally, it goes to mediation or a facilitated meeting before we get to the due process thing, and we all sit down and talk about why the student needs support. But it may not be used where a student is homeschooled or privately placed. So we don't talk about it a lot during this, and I think I might make a note to add to that. But students that are homeschooled or placed in private schools within a district are still the district's responsibility if they have a disability. Okay, they still are responsible to evaluate that student, but some parents may not want that evaluation. So then at that point, the school could not go to due process. Okay, so it has to be a student that's already attending their school. They have identified them as possibly needing support and wanting an evaluation, but the parent won't agree to it or cannot be found. The parent can then, or the school can then go to due process to get it resolved, see if they can evaluate the student. And the same thing for reevaluation. If a parent refuses to consent, the school may not file due process. Okay. Like consent for the initial evaluation, schools must receive informed consent for parents before providing special education services. If the parent refuses consent for these schools, the school cannot provide services or develop an IEP. I have seen this where a parent does not want speech services from the school. They're already getting private speech services from the school, but the school wants to give the student an IEP and provide OT support, or an IEP and provide extra math support. a parent cannot pick and choose services, okay? Now sometimes if the parent is very very insistent and wants this to happen, you may get a school to consent to not giving the therapy services. They are, however, still have to write a goal for those services. And then the progress report on those goals are going to put parent refuses services through the whole thing. Okay. There are other ways that you can kind of conquer that. You can say, can our therapist work closer with your therapist? Can we meet goals? Can we provide services in the classroom instead of pulling her out? But there are ways to not, but it is very important to remember that a parent cannot pick and choose supports. If the school says this is what we want to offer you, you got to go with it. You can't say, well, I want speech but not OT. You can, however, say, you're giving me speech, but I still think I need OT. You can say those things and hear your concerns met and ask for further evaluations and do all the things for conflict resolution if you need to. But you can't deny one support and want to get another. Does that make sense to everybody? And I've been a parent like that have done that. Like, I paid a lot of money for outside speech services, and I was really afraid that the speech therapist at the school wasn't going to line up the therapy with what I was paying for. And I was worried they were going to contradict each other. We did that even with ABA. Like we were getting outside ABA therapy, but the school was doing this and that or whatever in OT, and I was really worried about that. But you can't pick and choose the services. You have to sit down and have another meeting and talk about how those services can align better and how you can, work towards the same goals. That's why anyone that's involved in your students' education can come with a parent to a meeting and talk about how they're involved in the education or write in a letter or something like that, and the school can consider the input there. But a parent cannot pick and choose services. I have seen it happen before, and a school will write a speech goal and then the progress that will just say parent refuses services. But there are other ways than just refusing the services. We can talk about maybe doing it on a consult basis or doing it through communication speech inside the classroom. But just remember that you're not supposed to pick and choose services. It's not supposed to happen that way. So again, I took it from SIPR and not the parent guide, but there is a template letter on requesting those evaluations. So this up here, you're going to put the parent here. All right. If you help a parent to draft this letter, you'd put the parent up here. Your special education coordinator or principal is going to go here. Your name of school and the address. Sometimes you might put like District 40 and then Southside School, or you might put Springfield District 186, but then put Blackhawk School. So it depends on how big your district is. But your special education coordinator needs to go on here too. Your child's teacher can go on here, or they can be CC'd down here at the bottom. All right. So you as an advocate, your name doesn't go anywhere in the body of this letter. You can absolutely be CC'd down here or included on the email where the parent sends it to the district. But this comes from the parent's point of view, okay? So dear Unit 40 school, I'm writing about my son or daughter. You're going to enter their name. I like to put their birth date there as well and list what you want to happen, why you want it to happen, the interventions you've already been using, whatever those are, and then sign it. You can also put in here, I have an outside evaluation from such and such. It's attached to the letter. But you want to make the letter as detailed as possible. I'm sorry, you want to make the letter not super detailed because these are things you're going to talk about in the meeting, but you want to address exactly what you feel the concern is, what the school can do, which is evaluate your student, and that you want to sit down to talk about it and sign for those consents. Okay? Any questions about that at all?
No.
Okay. There are like hundreds of templates for these out here. I like Zippers better. So that. So what are these evaluations going to look like? So the school should be using a variety of assessment tools and strategies to gather the information. They're not supposed to use just any single measure or assessment. They need to make sure that what they're using is, up to date and relevant to what your concerns are. So at that meeting, you're going to talk about the different areas of concerns, and your student may be evaluated in different certain areas for whatever. Hold on, I think I keep forgetting to go back to this. Maybe not. I'm going back and forth with ESP. I'm sorry, guys. I keep doing that. But there's, you're going to talk about the different areas in which your student may need to be evaluated. So you go in and you start talking about their academics and the worries that you have with their academics. And so then they're going to evaluate their academics. But you may have also talked about their communication skills, and so they're going to evaluate their communication skills as well. And it needs to be done in the student's native language to them so they understand what's happening, and it needs to be done by a team that's familiar with your student, unless it's a independent evaluation, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the evaluation is basically a way that the school is going to collect the data and they're going to evaluate your student. Again, like an example of being done in several different ways. If you're measuring a student's reading ability, maybe you're going to have them read text from the computer and then answer questions, but you might also read them a different text and have them answer questions. So if you're testing their reading and comprehension, you're doing it across many different levels. All right. Maybe you're testing their math skills. They're supposed to be at a third grade level. You're going to start maybe at kindergarten, do a little bit of kindergarten, a little bit of first grade, second grade, to try to see where they're at, where they're falling at. This way, if we have correct data with our evaluations, we can develop the correct goals later on. And it must be useful in determining whether the child is a child with a disability and the content of the child's IEP. So we're going to use all this data and put that into the IEP. Of course, they have to ensure that they're not racially or culturally discriminatory or provided in the native language of the student, are used for the purposes in which the assessments are measured by a trained knowledge personnel. We're not just going to have a one-on-one aide sit down and give a psychological assessment to a student. And they must ensure that the child is assessed in all areas of the suspected disability, and parents should inform the school in writing of the disabilities they suspect, I'm sorry. So we're going to talk about their developmental history. So talk about from day one when the child was born on. They may even talk about a history of pregnancy if we know that. We're going to talk about their cognitive and their academic achievement and behavioral and social emotional functioning in school. So those will all be there. So transferring students and evaluations. So for students who transfer to a different school, so they're at a school and they move to a new one, the receiving school must try to get the evaluation from the previous school. So they're going to start out with the school's IEP that they've created or an evaluation from the previous school and start out that way. That way the student is not going without supports while the school gathers more information. So the new school is absolutely going to do their own observations and develop a different IEP for that student. But in the meantime, then that student who's already been identified as having a disability is still going to be served. Okay. And parents can help expedite that by requesting in writing that the previous school forward the records. I always tell a parent when you're moving, get those records before you withdraw your student from the school so that you can personally take them with you. There's not usually a lot of problem with schools sending it to other schools, but it's, I just think it's a good idea to have it when you leave the school, when you withdraw your student. No idea what time it is. Does anybody need like a bathroom break? It's just now 7. Okay, I'm gonna keep going then. We're going to review existing data. So like if we've had RTI, we might review that data. Current classroom observations and observation by teachers and related other professionals within the school. How did everybody see the students doing? So this is like, I remember this happening like with one of my kids say, well, somebody came and watched me today. It was really weird. Most of the times the evaluator is just going to look like they blend in with the environment, in your student's classroom. And so that way they can observe your student. All right, eligibility. So upon completion of that evaluation, the determination of whether the child is a child with a disability and the educational needs of the child shall be determined by the team of qualified professionals, and that includes the parent and the Compass volunteer if you're there. So we're going to go into the meeting and we're going to talk about the evaluation results, and the team will tell the parent if they feel their student qualifies for special education or not. So, like I said, who else can contribute to evaluations? Anyone that has a stake in your child's education. So, if grandma helps your child with homework every night, grandma should have an input there. She should be saying, I see this with homework. As a scout leader, I've attended several IEPs because we developed our own individualized scouting plan for the student. We based them on an IEP. So I'm teaching this student on a level. So I, go there and state my concerns. I have a lot of doctors that'll write letters for IEPs or outside therapists that work with a student. The parents, absolutely. And then you as a Compass volunteer, if you're working with the family, they contribute to the evaluations. They go in, they say what they've seen, they have their evaluations read to them, and they say whether they agree with those evaluations or not. So if your student they can't be determined eligible for special education because of a lack of instruction. So if it is like they don't come to school a lot, they have a problem with truancy, and they're falling behind, we may look at providing more interventions for that student, but we're not going to have them be determined eligible because they haven't had instruction in reading and math. Now, if there's a history of truancy or behavioral issues that they're missing school, they may qualify in another eligibility category, but they're not going to qualify for academics because of the lack of instruction. So we might develop an IEP based on removing those behaviors or having the student functionally perform better in school, and then watch to see if the math and reading skills increase after those problems are being conquered. But it's not going to be due to lack of instruction, or if they have limited English, if they're an English language learner, there's other things. And you guys will, I think your homework next week is on cultural diversity, so you'll learn more about that. A copy of the evaluation report and the documentations determining eligibility should be given to the parents at least at no cost to the parents, by the way, 3 days before the IEP meeting. So at least 3 days before the meeting, you should have all those evaluation results so that you can go through and read them and understand if you're going to walk into this meeting and your kid's going to get an IEP or if you're not. So, and you do that by reading the results. They're not going to mark yes or no on that paper because then it's predetermined. Because you still have an input even after the evaluation results are done. But through reading these evaluations, you can determine if you feel like the student's going to get supports or not. That's not all the times true. Sometimes I read the evaluation and I think this kid is not going to get the support they need, and I'm surprised when I get there. But you should have some idea from those evaluation results what's going to happen. And the evaluation report should include recommendations for services for the child. So that they can make progress with the curriculum. An evaluation must be conducted before an existing child that has special education is going to change their eligibility. But no evaluation is required if the student has graduated from a secondary school with a regular diploma, or if the child exceeds the eligibility for IDEA, which is their 22nd birthday, unless their birthday falls within the school year, and then they can finish out that school year. So if the eligibility category for the student is going to change, an evaluation must occur first. So like I mentioned before, I have chosen not to get an evaluation for my student during a reeval. But this is not an option that I would present as wise to a parent or a Compass volunteer, because a child needs a proper evaluation those last few years of high school to make sure they have a supportive IEP so they continue to receive services in either secondary education, vocational, or independent living. And it is also very important, I can't stress this enough, that when your student finishes school, whether they graduate or age out, that they have a copy of that evaluation that you keep someplace safe. I, would recommend making several copies of that, because student records aren't kept forever. at your local school district. Sometimes school districts close, or I mean, it's just a very important idea to have that IEP in case your student may need to sign up for SSI in the future, or get into a day program, or those accommodations follow students to college. So it's important to have a copy of that IEP. So I kind of think it's 10 years that the school holds on to an IEP, but that might be wrong. That might be stretching it. It's not super long. Okay. So I even though I knew this information when I started graduate school, no, when I started my bachelor's program, I was working here and realized that the 504 plan that I had in high school could be adapted and put on to my bachelor's degree, and I could get some of those accommodations. My kids go to school where I went to high school, but guess what? They did not have a copy of my 504 plan anymore. Transcripts, yes, I can get my transcripts that show my grades, but they did not have a copy of my 504. Thankfully, my mom is a hoarder, pack rat. She had a lot of things, and I was able to find a copy of a 504 plan that wasn't even the last one from my senior year, but I was able to show that, I received these accommodations and they were helpful, so that I could get those in college. So it's very important that your students have a copy of that IEP when they graduate. So I think Carrie's presentation talks about the different areas of eligibility next, but I did want to go over those a little bit. So in Illinois, we have 13 different areas in which a student can be identified as needing support. We do have an area called developmental delay. A student will only be eligible in that category until the age of 9. So threes, right? We do get one at age 3, we get one at age 6, and then by the time reevaluation comes around before 9, they would need to be reevaluated and put in another category to see if they're still eligible. That has to do with brain development and how the brain changes. So a student, this is a good example of, a student will have a diagnosis of ADHD or autism before the age of 9. And a parent will say, I don't feel like my student's IEP is for their autism or for their ADHD because it doesn't say that on the paper. That's where you could go in and say, I have this IADSI diagnosis of this. Can you make sure it's listed in my health information? I might be getting some extra accommodations or modifications to help with this. It's just not my eligibility category. But then when that student is getting ready to turn 9, we can see about changing it to that eligibility category. Does that make sense to everybody? Go ahead. So the, most popular, I guess, the one that most students are put into is other health impairment, which is where we see a lot of our students with self-regulation disorders like ADD or ADHD. Specific learning disability is all the disses, like your dysgraphia, dyslexia, dyscalculia. Or it might say the student has a specific disability related to math. It might not diagnose it or name it in there. Another one would be a traumatic brain injury, meaning a student has had an injury that hopefully will start to get better over time, and it impacts their abilities, and can be put in that category. There's a vision impairment. There's a hearing impairment. There's a deaf and blindness category. There's autism, of course. What am I forgetting? I'm forgetting lots of them. So orthopedic impairment is there. I'm forgetting them. Like they just flew out of my brain. So anyway, there's lots of different areas. Carrie covers this a little bit more. But after the evaluation results are in, you'll sit down as a team and they'll say, I believe your student fits in this category. Again, they're not diagnosing your student. They're just saying, I believe your student has a disability related to this. Now, obviously, sometimes they're going to name that disability. That does not mean you have a diagnosis in your hand, but you can use that information to take to a doctor to get a diagnosis, right? Believe it or not, my oldest son, who has very significant autism, when my youngest son had his first IEP meeting in preschool and they told me autism, I looked at them like they were crazy because it was a way different type of autism than already lived in our house. So that's an example of they didn't diagnose him, but they said, hey, we see signs of this. You should talk to your doctor. And then he had an IEP that under autism eligibility. So now a parent can disagree with evaluation results. Okay, maybe the school came back and didn't see that your student had a disability. And again, even though you have an outside diagnosis of a disability, then they're just saying we don't see that the student's disability impacts their education. So they can come back and say that. Or maybe they come back and say, I see it under OHI, and you say, it's not, it's autism. My student doesn't have another health impairment. It's autism. You can ask then for an independent evaluation done at the school's expense. So this can include any type of evaluation that's done for the student. You can request one at the public's expense. All right. You cannot say that I want Dr. Selznick to do my evaluation. You can absolutely suggest different people, but the school doesn't have to pick who you pick. At the same time, if they tell you who they're going to use and you don't agree with it, you can object to that. So, having said that, you don't like get to say, I want Dr. Phillips at Sarah Bush Lincoln to do my psychological evaluation. The school can say, well, we don't want to use Dr. Phillips. We would rather use this person, but they have to give it to that to you in writing with justification as to why they don't want to use that person. So if a parent requests the IEE at a public's expense, the public agency must, without unnecessary delay, either initiate the due process to show the evaluation is appropriate or ensure that IEE is provided. So if they don't agree with you to give an IEE, the school then initiates due process. They have no other choice. If you ask for that independent evaluation and they don't agree to give you one, IDEA states that at that point due process has to be initiated. And that has to happen very quickly. Like they should be sending a letter to the state that day. Or if you want an IEE to happen and they say, okay, we'll give you one, that needs to be initiated right away as well. And if they do go to due process, it's the school's responsibility then to bear proof that their evaluation was accurate. The school can conduct another evaluation, but this cannot interfere with the IEE. So they can at the same time do a whole nother evaluation that they just did to prove that what they need in due process, but that doesn't mean that they're doing an independent evaluation. All right. Sometimes parents will ask for an IE because they feel like that there was bias already going into the evaluation the school did. So we do see that a lot. And I will have parents request certain doctors to do it or certain specialists in the area to do it. And you can absolutely request it. The school doesn't have to agree with it, but they do have to disagree with it in writing with justification. So if the hearing officer decides in a due process hearing that the agency evaluation was appropriate, the parents still have the right to an IEE, but not at public expense. So if you go all the way to due process, again, I don't see this a lot. I see parents that do request an IEE, but I don't see it going all the way to due process a lot. Due process is expensive, no matter which way you look at it. It's also time consuming. But if the hearing officer decides that the school's evaluation was accurate, the parent can still get an outside evaluation, but at that point, it is at their expense. A lot of the times, if a parent requests an IAE, they've already done their own evaluation. They're coming into it saying, my doctor did this evaluation, your doctor did this evaluation, your school psychologist did this evaluation. They don't meet up. Why don't they meet up? I want an IEE. Sometimes I even see a doctor in a school using the same evaluation criteria, like they'll both use a Connors to see if there's a possibility of ADD, and they won't match. And there's like certain incidents when the points may be off a little bit. Like, so for IQ testing or cognitive testing, there's like a 15-point variable that can happen there for an outside evaluation and in a school evaluation where they don't match up. But they should they should be cousins, right? They may not be identical twins, but they should like kind of look like each other. Otherwise, what's happening here? And just like everything else, there is templates on SIPR and in the parent guide for requesting that IEE. The school can ask the parent why they want that IEE. They have the right. The school says, well, why don't you like our evaluation? However, the parent is not required to provide proof. You don't have to give that proof. They can ask it. And it's not likely to get a favorable ruling from a hearing officer without a valid reason for an IEE. So you can't just come in and say, I don't like what you did. and just leave that at that. You should explain it more. You should say, I had an outside evaluation, it doesn't match, or I have, we have a genetic component for dyslexia in our family, and he's way behind on reading. I really think dyslexia is what's going on. Those are valid reasons for wanting an IEE, but just to say, I don't like the teacher that gave it, or I don't like the psychologist that gave this, is not a valid one. You could absolutely say that this psychologist had a bias going into here. She doesn't believe in autism, or she doesn't think my student has autism. You can say that bias, but you can't, you shouldn't, when you get ready to go to the due process hearing, should you have to go that far. And again, I don't see it happening a lot. You need to have some justification why you wanted the IEE. Upon request for an IE, the school shall provide to the parents information about where the IE may be attained and the agency criteria applicable for the IEs. A lot of the times, if you request an IE, the school is going to then go to their special education cooperative and see who's on staff there that could do the evaluation. That's usually what happens. They may use a psychologist from a neighboring school district as well. The parent does choose the evaluator, not the school. The parent is not limited to evaluators on the district's list, so you can suggest people outside that list. The school may not insist upon consulting with the evaluator chosen by the parent or having the evaluator enter into a contract with the school. So that's really good information. So they don't have to meet with the evaluator privately and consult with them before they do the evaluation. The evaluator also does not have to go into contract with the school. They don't have to sign any type of contract for the school. And this is more criteria for the IE. A parent is entitled to only one IE at the public's expense each time the school conducts an evaluation with the parent disagrees. So if the IE comes back and says the same thing that the school's evaluation did, you can't request another one at the public's expense. You can absolutely get your own, but you can't request another IE. And they must be considered. Okay, the school must consider those IE results. Any questions? You guys are so quiet tonight. So having said that, let's talk a little bit about doing the pretest again. I am so sorry that I shared. So Dustin, I think, brought it to my attention that I was sharing the wrong form of everything. So I apologize for that. And when I noticed I was sharing the wrong form of everything, I never thought to go back and check on the compass test. So I have went through, added the questions back that were deleted by accident at no fault of people that were trying to take the test. And it needs to be retaken again. So I did send that by email to everybody today. I'll put it back in the chat that I hope is working now. Who can see your messages? Everyone. Okay, I don't know if it's still disabled or not, but so that's there. And if you could please take that again, since you have to take that again, we're not going to do the little 5-question quiz. However, I was very happy with everybody's little 5-question quiz that they did. It seems like everybody was, retaining the information that we went over. You do have homework tonight. It is just like a little bit more about IEPs before you go into watching Carrie's session next week. So you don't have to listen to me talk next week. It's Carrie. She'll do your presentation next week. But just like last week, tomorrow morning, I will send a follow-up email to everybody and say thank you for joining me tonight. Here is the Google Drive to access your information. Here's what the homework is. I'll make sure that I put that link in the body of the email this time instead of just within the PowerPoint. And remind everybody again to take the quiz. How long would you recommend a parent keep the IEP of their child when they graduate for the transition program? Forever. I would recommend forever. You never know when you're going to need that IEP, honestly. I've had parents call here with their adult dependents that are 45, 50 years old trying to get into residential placement, and they wish they had a copy of that IEP. So I would recommend keeping it forever. And I plan on, so Davin's 20, he'll be 21 in July, so it's our last year of school. I plan on making probably 10 copies of the IEP. I plan on keeping some virtually. I want to put one on a cloud that's safe without when nobody can get to. Make sure that plenty of people have a copy of it. And remember, I I give a new copy to my doctor every year of his IEP so that it's on file there with his medical records. So that is a way sometimes that you can kind of go around that. But absolutely, even when they graduate from their transition program, keep a hold of it. You never know what you're going to need it from. Any more questions, guys?
Yeah, when you were talking about the independent evaluation,
Mm-hmm.
um, the on the last couple of slides, it talked about the parent deciding who does that, but I remember prior to that something saying that
Yeah, so I guess that's a little misunderstanding there. So a parent can absolutely request who they want to do it. I do think I've read somewhere where the school can say they don't want that person, they want somebody else to do it, but the slides did not reflect that. So I don't know if I've been misunderstanding information wrong for the last 5 years or if I'm trying to remember. I had a parent, and IEs don't happen a lot, like where a school won't do it. By the way, like I said, it's very rare that a school won't do an IE. Um, but I think I had a parent that wanted a BCBA, a specific BCBA, to do the evaluation because they had worked with the student before, and the school came back and said that we would rather have somebody within our co-op do it. And I hope that I didn't give the parent the wrong advice there. I hope not. But yeah, you're right. The slides absolutely do say that the parent can pick who that is. Um, I was really thinking it was like a list, like the parent, like the school gave them a list of people they work with, but this says that absolutely a parent can say, no, I want to do it with somebody else. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
yeah, I wasn't sure. My limited experience in that with my own son is that when I asked for something and they said no, and I said I would like an evaluation, they said okay, you can have it. And then when I asked for a specific person that was covered under my insurance and I was paying for it, at first I asked for a person and they said no. I said, yeah, my insurance will pay for it and you're not out of pocket anything. He said, oh yeah, that's fine.
Oh,
So
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
as soon as the money was involved, it changed the
they
whole
changed.
dynamic.
Yes.
So, and they even
Well,
let this person who had been denied access to the school into the school several days to observe. I mean, it was just
uh-huh.
so.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because I do want to mention that a little bit. Under the Every Student Succeeds Act, a parent has the right to come in and observe their student. You should absolutely communicate with the school when you want to come and make sure it's, will work for the classroom. But I get a lot back from where a parent has called and say, hey, I'm, worried about their math. Can I come in and see what they're doing? And a school say, oh, that's against our privacy policy. That is not. Really show me that written in the school handbook and show me how that can, goes along with my student's IEP. I have a right to observe in the classroom. If someone's doing an independent evaluation, they're going to have to come in there and see what's going on too, right? So, I have seen some schools do a little kickback where like the aunt that comes to an IEP meeting with the parent wanted to come and observe and the school said no because they weren't a parent. We were able to write a letter that says my aunt is very much, she does the homework with my daughter after school every day. She's there to do this and she needs to be informed as well. So again, when you request things in writing, the school is obligated to send you back a denial in writing with justification. And they want to make sure that justification is legitimate because if you go to the next step of due process and it goes in front of a hearing officer and the hearing officer says this is not justification and this is not justification, the school has then wasted their time, money, and resources. So the school, wants to, just like you said, when I requested this, okay, then we'll consent. So if you know what to ask for, the school is, going to I don't want to say they're going to go along with it, but they're going to know that you know what you're talking about. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's been my experience. I started out with this not knowing anything about it, and my wife, who's a special education teacher, not knowing either because she doesn't deal with autism and
Hmm.
other things. And the more I learned, the more, I mean, we went through 3 years of regression, and now we're within half a school year, he's already in the general education classroom.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, but it took a lot of, I had an SEA tell me that autism and ADHD were handled the same within the school district. So it didn't matter whether,
Oh yeah, I've heard that
and
one.
so that was the red flag that got me into school, and it led me down the path to get my teaching credential and led me down the path to my master's program that I'm in. And yeah, it's crazy some of the things. And once you
Yeah,
show that you know what's going on, the whole dynamic changed. It was
absolutely.
so.
Absolutely. And, educate yourself and have parents. And that's, as you as a Compass volunteer, you're encouraging these parents to educate themselves too, to become better, strong advocates so then their students can become self advocates. I mean, that's the whole goal of our program here. And just like you said, I was the same way. Like I started out, I didn't know what autism was. Someone who walked in the room and said, I'm sorry, Abby, your son has autism. Have a nice day. Figure it out, and you go from there. But if you don't know what to ask for, it doesn't get done. Now, sometimes that's a little different. Sometimes the school, will through child find identify that a student needs support, but then the parent still needs to know what to ask for. And we have so many parents that call and say, my student was evaluated and I didn't agree with it, so I didn't know what else to do. I figured I was just, lost. And no, they have the right to request that independent evaluation. And I don't know everything. Like Carrie doesn't know everything either. There's lots of times that a Compass volunteer will call here and ask questions. Not Jamie, he knows everything. But no, a Compass volunteer will call here and ask questions. And I have to call ISB or I have to call IGAC or Equip for Quality to get the answers for those questions. So you're not required to know everything. All right. There's other channels, but we are here to help the parents become a stronger advocate for themselves and become a stronger advocate for their students. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. Let's see. Oh, I hope I was recording this whole time. My goodness, I'm so awful.